What's going on? I asked, my voice steady but sharp as my gaze darted around their smug faces. The room seemed to hum with an unspoken conspiracy. My in-laws surrounded me, their expressions alight with satisfaction, as though they'd orchestrated this moment with precision. Finally, one of them broke the silence, their voice dripping with false gravity. We need to have a serious talk. I straightened, drawing in a breath to anchor myself. All right, I said, keeping my tone measured, go ahead. Edgar, my husband, exhaled heavily, his eyes fixed on the floor. I sold the house to my parents, he began, his words slow and deliberate. He hesitated, savoring the moment. Then, like a blade slipping between ribs, he added, and I think we should get a divorce. The corners of his parents' mouths twitched upward in triumph, their glances toward each other smug and victorious, as though they had just secured some grand prize. Without missing a beat, I reached into my bag, drew out the signed divorce papers, and set them on the table. Removing my wedding ring, I placed it neatly beside the papers and stood. Then I suppose I'll be leaving, I said evenly. The silence that followed was laden with disbelief. They had no idea of the storm about to break over their carefully laid plans. My name is Madison, and today I'm 50. A lifetime of memories, some bright, some shadowed, has brought me to this moment. My children, now grown and thriving on their own, live far from the drama that has quietly consumed my marriage. Once an ordinary salaried worker, I've since found a new calling as a teacher of handmade accessories. What began as a simple hobby has blossomed into a profession, one that fills my days with purpose and joy. This career shift was transformative. Through teaching and creating, I've rediscovered a version of myself long buried beneath years of sacrifice and compromise. Though some might scoff at turning a pastime into a livelihood, I am at peace, content with the life I've built. Edgar and I met in what now feels like another lifetime. Our paths first crossed at the company where I once worked, his role at a client firm drawing us together. What began as work-related camaraderie deepened over time, culminating in a marriage rooted in love and mutual respect, or so I thought. Our first years together were joyful, even idyllic. We welcomed a son, a bright and driven boy who grew into a man any parent would be proud of. He graduated from a prestigious university, married well, and now thrives in a life of his own making. But even as our son flourished, the cracks in my marriage with Edgar began to widen. The man I once knew, kind, attentive, and supportive, was slowly replaced by someone unrecognizable. Over time, Edgar became controlling, his demands growing more unreasonable by the day. He treated me not as his equal but as his servant, his moods mercurial and his words cutting. His transformation reached its nadir when he abruptly quit his job, offering no explanation. He spent his days at home, listless and unmotivated, while I carried the weight of our household alone, adding insult to injury. He refused to contribute to daily chores, his indifference toward our shared life palpable. The house we now live in, my house, was my dream brought to life. Every inch of it reflects my aspirations, from the spacious kitchen designed with care to the details I painstakingly planned. I financed the rebuild entirely, saving for years to create the home I'd always envisioned. Yet Edgar's disdain for my efforts was clear. He dismissed the project as frivolous, a waste of money. "This house is just a giant pit for your savings," he sneered once, his words like acid on my pride. Despite his bitterness, I pushed forward. The joy of seeing my dream materialize outweighed his negativity, but the financial strain of the construction lingered. The cost had exceeded all expectations, forcing us to take on a significant loan. Still, I consoled myself with the hope that the happiness our new home brought would carry us through. Instead, Edgar's resentment festered. His participation in the planning had been minimal, and he let his displeasure be known. Sulking and throwing petty tantrums, he seemed determined to undermine the joy this house represented, and the distance between us grew insurmountable. One afternoon, shortly after we moved in, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. I rose to answer it, but Edgar, unusually quick, intercepted me. His eagerness confirmed my suspicions. He knew who it was. Moments later, laughter and cheery voices spilled into the house, their presence heavy with a sense of foreboding, and when the living room door opened, everything changed. When I stepped into the living room, I was greeted by my unexpected in-laws, Bradley and Emerson. A knot formed in my stomach. My relationship with them had always been strained, fraught with disapproval and condescension. From the moment Edgar and I announced our engagement, They treated me with cold disdain, constantly pointing out my lower social status. Even on our wedding day, their smiles were forced, their congratulations half-hearted. Their interference didn't stop after the wedding. Each visit carried an air of judgment, making me question how to navigate their hostility. Over time, I had fooled myself into thinking their meddling had eased, but seeing them here now, their faces alight with satisfaction, shattered that illusion. "Good evening," I greeted politely, masking my unease. They didn't respond. Instead, they brushed past me, Emerson deliberately bumping my shoulder as they entered. Their eyes immediately began sweeping over the house, Bradley murmuring something about the spacious kitchen. Edgar, suddenly animated, took the lead, proudly showing them around like a host unveiling a prized possession. They cooed over the features, expressions dripping with envy and delight. When they returned, Bradley's smug grin lingered. Edgar's demeanor shifted abruptly. He snapped at me, his voice loud and sharp. "Go and prepare some tea and snacks." Startled, I hurried to comply, but when I brought out the refreshments, his parents barely acknowledged the effort. Bradley muttered, "Is this the best you can do?" before returning to admire the house's decor. "It's quite lovely," he said, his tone more appreciative of the furniture than the tea I served. Then Edgar, with a smile wider than I'd seen in years, dropped a bombshell. "Why don't you both move in with us? There's plenty of room." I froze, the words hanging in the air. His parents didn't even glance my way. They simply nodded, their faces lighting up as if they'd been waiting for this invitation. Moments later, they left, their retreating laughter echoing in the hallway. Edgar followed them to the door, joking and chatting, his warmth for them a stark contrast to his icy treatment of me. The visits started sporadically, once or twice a month turned into weekly drop-ins. Soon, they came almost daily, their presence a shadow I couldn't escape. They criticized everything, my cooking, my housekeeping, even my relationship with our son. Edgar stood by silently or, worse, joined in their complaints, piling on grievances as if I were some constant source of failure. "You never listen," he would accuse. "You've made our son suffer because of your stubbornness." I endured it all in silence, swallowing my frustration and muttering apologies to diffuse the tension. But their relentless presence didn't stop there. When I wasn't home, they would let themselves in, treating my space as their own. One day, returning earlier than expected, I found them lounging on the couch, acting as if they belonged. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice shaking with suppressed anger. Bradley barely looked up. "We were just visiting, dear," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "It's not like you're ever around." Their dismissal stung, but it was their attitude that truly unnerved me. It was as though I were the intruder in my own home. Then came the day that changed everything. Driving home from work, I noticed a large moving truck parked outside the house. The logo read Moving Center. My pulse quickened as I spotted Edgar talking with the driver, gesturing toward the house. When he saw me, he quickly turned away, slipping inside. I stepped out of my car, only to see Bradley and Emerson arriving with perfect timing. They greeted me as if nothing were out of the ordinary, then casually walked inside. Following them, I stopped dead in my tracks. The living room I had painstakingly furnished was unrecognizable. My belongings had vanished, replaced by their outdated furniture. The sofa, the coffee table, even the curtains, it all belonged to them. It felt like an invasion. No, it was an erasure. I sat down on the foreign sofa, the chill of the fabric pressing against me. They surrounded me like predators circling prey, their smirks practically oozing triumph. Edgar stood behind them, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Finally, Bradley spoke, his tone smugly cheerful. "We need to talk." I clenched my fists beneath the table, bracing myself for what was coming. I responded with feigned calm. "What is it?" Edgar sighed deeply, refusing to meet my gaze. "I sold the house to my parents," he announced, pausing for dramatic effect before adding, "and I think we should get a divorce." His parents sat back smugly, their expressions triumphant, as if they had successfully cornered me. They clearly enjoyed toying with what they assumed would be my helplessness. But I was anything but helpless. I had been anticipating this move for weeks. Without hesitation, I reached into my bag, pulled out the signed divorce papers I had prepared in advance, and slid them across the table. Removing my wedding ring, I placed it beside the documents. "I'll be leaving the house, then," I said firmly, meeting their stunned gazes. "For some time." I had suspected Edgar's peculiar behavior and the synchronized timing of his parents' visits. To confirm my doubts, I installed discreet surveillance cameras around the house, syncing them to my phone. It didn't take long for the footage to reveal the truth. Edgar and his parents were plotting to sell the house behind my back. Their gleeful discussions solidified my resolve. I began taking quiet but decisive steps to protect myself. First, I searched for a new place to live. At the same time, I used the mortgage details I uncovered through the cameras to transfer the loan from my name to Edgar's. If they were so determined to have the house, they could shoulder the $1,900 monthly payment I had been faithfully making from my salary. I doubted they could afford it, and I certainly wasn't going to help. With my plan in motion, I packed my belongings and moved into a cozy new apartment, outfitted with fresh furniture that symbolized a clean slate. For the first time in years, I felt free. One lazy afternoon on my day off, I slept in, savoring the peace of my new home. Just as I was about to drift back to sleep, the doorbell rang, jarring me awake. To my disbelief, Edgar and his parents stood at my doorstep, their faces a mix of anger and desperation. "What are you doing here?" I asked, blocking their path. Without waiting for an invitation, they pushed past me, spreading out a document on my table. "You changed the name on the house loan without telling us," Edgar shouted, his voice thick with indignation. Keeping my composure, I replied, "Yes, I did. After all, you wanted me out of the house, didn't you?" Their smug confidence evaporated in an instant. "We can't pay that," Edgar snapped, his tone frantic. Calmly, I explained, "If you don't pay, the interest and penalties will snowball. The bank won't care about your personal circumstances." At first, they seemed doubtful, but Edgar quickly searched for answers on his phone. As he read, his face drained of color. "What are we supposed to do?" his mother whispered, her voice trembling. I shrugged. "Maybe find a job. It's time for a fresh start." Their protests escalated, with Edgar confessing to his crippling gambling debts and lack of income. Despite their pleas for help, citing everything we've been through together, I remained unmoved. "This was your choice," I said, escorting them to the door. "Now live with it." When they attempted to report me to the police, their baseless claims were dismissed, and they were removed from my property. Unable to keep up with the mortgage payments, they eventually lost the house and moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Edgar picked up a part-time job to scrape by, his dreams of an easy life in tatters. Meanwhile, my life blossomed. I poured myself into my work, and in my free time, I started a blog about handmade crafts. To my surprise, it quickly gained traction, doubling my monthly income. Soon, I was receiving invitations to lead workshops and courses, expanding my reach and success. I had no desire to remarry. My focus was on building a life of independence and fulfillment. One day, while tidying my apartment, I came across an old household account book from the early days of my marriage. Flipping through its pages, I was reminded of the sacrifices I had made and the struggles I had endured. A wave of bittersweet nostalgia swept over me, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of empowerment. Placing the book back on the shelf, I smiled. The past no longer defined me. My future was mine to shape, and I was ready to embrace it wholeheartedly.